there will come a night, not followed by morning, a final sunrise that never sets again. What if Earth, the very ground we stand on, simply stopped spinning? It wouldn't begin with a bang. There would be no explosion, no great rupture of land or sea. Only stillness, a quiet transformation. One half of Earth would turn into a furnace, scorched by the never-setting sun. Oceans would start to evaporate. The land would dry and crack. Forests would die beneath an unblinking sky. The other side of the planet would slip into eternal darkness. Temperatures would plummet. The atmosphere would freeze and fall like snow. Cities would vanish beneath ice. And silence. Life, as we know it, would face a reality it was never built for. A world split between burning day and frozen night. Time would lose its rhythm. No sunrise to mark the beginning of a day. No sunset to signal rest. No clocks that matter. Only a strange, fractured sense of existence, stretched thin between two extremes. And yet, this isn't fantasy. It's not far-fetched fiction. Earth's spin is already slowing slowly, invisibly, year after year. The forces that keep our planet turning are fading with time. What happens when the motion finally stops? Could storms still rage without rotation? Would tides exist if the moon lost its grip? Could anything survive in the narrow band where night meets day? This story is not about destruction. It's about what remains when motion ends. So close your eyes and listen closely. You are about to enter a world that forgot to turn. In the vast silence of the early solar system, Earth was born not with stillness, but with motion. A swirling cloud of gas and dust, drawn together by gravity, gave rise to the planet we now call home. But it was not just the act of formation that defined Earth, it was the spin. That initial chaotic twist, the result of countless collisions and gravitational nudges, set our world turning, and it has never stopped. This rotation, once faster than it is today, sculpted the very structure of life. It determined the rhythm of light and darkness, the alternation of day and night. Without it, there would be no sunrise to stir waking life, no sunset to signal rest. Time, as we know, it measured in rotations and revolutions, was born from the spin. The spin also shaped Earth's form. The centrifugal force from rotation caused the planet to bulge slightly at the equator, flattening it near the poles. It affected the flow of molten material inside, helping generate Earth's magnetic field, a protective shield that has guarded us from solar and cosmic radiation since the beginning. In this invisible armor, the spin whispered its silent protection. Weather, too, owes its complexity to rotation. The Coriolis effect, a consequence of Earth's spin, guides winds and ocean currents, directing storms and shaping climate zones. Without the spin, air would move differently straight from high to low pressure. Without the graceful arc we know, hurricanes wouldn't spiral, jet streams wouldn't form, even rainfall patterns would shift into something unrecognizable. Balance fragile and invisible depends on this rotation. It stabilizes the tilt of Earth's axis, which governs the seasons, the consistent cycling between solstice and equinox, the ebb and flow of warmth and cold. All trace back to a simple truth: the Earth spins. Over billions of years, this motion has slowed ever so slightly. Tidal forces between Earth and the Moon act like brakes, gradually stretching our days. Ancient coral fossils reveal that Earth once spun faster, cramming more days into each year. Time itself has expanded with age, subtly reshaped by gravitational tug and planetary rhythm. But what if that rhythm stopped? It's easy to take the spin for granted. It is so fundamental, so consistent, that most of us never think about it. Yet the Earth's rotation is not eternal. It is the result of initial energy momentum carried across epochs. If interrupted, everything we know would begin to unravel, not with a bang, but with silence. Before imagining a world without spin, we must understand how deeply it governs every system we rely on. It's not merely about how the sun rises or sets. It's about energy balance, climate stability, and the cycles of life itself. In the polar regions, rotation affects how the sun skims the horizon or disappears for months. Along the equator, it determines the strength of trade winds and the rhythm of rainfall that feeds jungles. Without it, ecosystems collapse not immediately, but inevitably. Even human biology is entrained to Earth's rotation. Our circadian rhythms, the internal clocks that dictate sleep, alertness, hormone cycles are synced to the 24-hour day. A world without spin would mean permanent day for some, endless night for others. The brain, evolved for rhythm, would struggle in chaos. Yet, the spin is not guaranteed. Earth's rotation began as a consequence of formation. But like a top set spinning, friction and gravitational forces slowly drain its energy. In billions of years, that slowing could become significant. In theoretical extremes, a stopped Earth is possible, not probable soon, but conceivable across cosmic timescales. We live in the breath between motion and stillness. Our ancestors measured time by stars, by shadows, by the predictable arc of the sun across the sky, all thanks to Earth's spin. It is the baseline, the canvas upon which all life has been painted. This is the world we know, a spinning globe wrapped in light and shadow, in warmth and cold, in change. A world where night promises morning, and morning fades again to dusk. A world where time marches forward in rotation. But what if it stopped? The chapters ahead will walk into that possibility, not as fantasy, but as a question of physics, of cause and consequence. To truly understand the Earth, we must imagine what it would be without its rhythm. Only then can we appreciate how deeply the spin has shaped everything we are. Let us begin the journey not away from science, but deeper into it. Into the stillness that waits beyond the spin. For billions of years, Earth turned steadily, a quiet spin holding every rhythm we know. But in this chapter, we step into a world, not as it is, but as it could be. Imagine the unimaginable. Earth's rotation slows, and then stops. No spin, no dawn, no dusk. Just one side of the planet trapped in endless daylight, the other in unyielding darkness. It's not science fiction. It's a theoretical outcome grounded in physics, and its consequences would reshape everything. First comes the physics. Earth's rotation isn't powered by magic. It's inertia, the momentum left over from our planet's violent birth. But this momentum isn't infinite. Forces like tidal friction, mostly from the moon's pull, act like brakes over long time scales. If that braking continued long enough, or if another cosmic event disrupted the balance, the spin could slow dramatically, even to zero. As the rotation halts, the first major shift isn't visual, it's kinetic. Every object not anchored to the planet's crust would feel inertia's last whisper. Oceans would surge, winds would roar. A final storm of momentum would ripple across continents. Planes would fall out of the sky. Satellites and orbits would destabilize. Even tectonic stress would spike from the sudden change in centrifugal balance. Earth would quake, not from within, but from the stillness. Then the world would settle into its new shape. The side facing the sun would burn. With no rotation to distribute heat, solar energy would pour onto that half of the globe without rest. Temperatures would skyrocket, not just like a summer heat wave, but more like a constant furnace. Oceans would begin to boil near the equator, creating massive superstorms that never rotate away. Deserts would expand, forests would ignite, and everything built for cycles of day and night would falter. On the other side, where sunlight never comes, the opposite fate unfolds. Temperatures plummet. Without the warming effect of the sun, that hemisphere would become an eternal winter. Moisture in the air would freeze, fall, and never melt. Cities would be buried under snow and ice. The ground would crack and shrink. No photosynthesis, no agriculture, no power from solar energy. Entire nations would be trapped in darkness and silence, but a narrow strip would remain. A twilight zone, the Terminator line, where the sun hovers forever at the horizon. Here, some semblance of habitability could exist. A place not too hot, not too cold. This band might become humanity's last refuge, stretching around the planet like a glowing belt. But survival wouldn't be easy. Wind patterns would shift chaotically. Atmospheric flows would tear across this region. The battle between hot and cold would never stop. Living here would be like standing at the edge of two worlds, scorched fire and frozen shadow. Earth's systems, so reliant on motion, would collapse. The magnetic field, partially driven by rotational energy in Earth's molten core, could weaken. That means more solar and cosmic radiation striking the surface. Aurora displays would fade, protection would thin, and as the field fades, the atmosphere itself could begin to erode into space. Not instantly, but inevitably. Water cycles, too, would break. Without spin, evaporation and rainfall wouldn't follow the patterns we know. On the hot side, oceans would vanish into steam. On the cold side, any vapor would freeze and settle as snow, never to return. Over centuries, water would be lost, locked in polar ice, or escaped into space, and with water gone, life would follow. Plants, unable to photosynthesize under constant light or endless dark, would die. Animals, deprived of rhythm and climate, would vanish. Even microbial life would struggle. Entire ecosystems would blink out, not from violence, but from imbalance. But perhaps most haunting would be the human experience. Time would lose its meaning. There'd be no sunrise to mark a new day, no sunset to mark its end. Societies built around sleep, work, prayer, celebration, all would drift into disorder. The mental toll would be staggering. Depression, disorientation, insomnia. Clocks would still tick, but they'd no longer reflect reality. Culturally, the shift would redefine civilization. Governments might migrate their capitals to the twilight zone. Wars could erupt over habitable land. New cities would be built under artificial light or deep underground to escape heat and cold. Energy demands would skyrocket just to cool or heat what was once temperate. Innovation would become survival. The modern world would fragment into zones of light, dark, and dusk. Yet even in this apocalyptic shift, Earth would still orbit. The sun, the seasons caused by Earth's tilt, not its spin, would technically remain, though their effects would be distorted. The hot side would still face varying solar angles across the year. The cold side might see a faint glow change, but never true warmth. The twilight zone would shift slightly, but never enough to offer relief. Astronomers looking at Earth from afar might still see it glimmer blue and white, at least for a while. But the heartbeat of the planet, its rhythmic turn, would be gone. Earth would resemble a two-faced coin, one side gleaming, the other shadowed, neither alive in the way we know. And this thought leads to the final, chilling question. If spin was everything, if it shaped time, life, weather, light, what are we without it? When Earth stops spinning, the loss isn't just mechanical, it's symbolic. It marks the end of rhythm, the death of momentum. It is the quiet collapse of balance, and in that silence, we realize motion was never just about physics. It was about meaning. The moment Earth ceased its spin, the countdown to catastrophe began. But it wasn't immediate chaos. It was a creeping, steady unraveling of systems. Now, with one face locked in permanent daylight, the real transformation begins. This side of the planet, once ruled by the balance of sunrise and sunset, now becomes a furnace under an unflinching star. The sun rises no more because it never sets. Its position, frozen in the sky, directs unrelenting heat onto one hemisphere of Earth, without night to provide relief, without rotation to disperse energy. The surface temperature begins to climb steadily. The soil, once rich with moisture, begins to dry. Forests, once alive with whispers of wind and birdsong, now stand still, their leaves wilting in the glare. The atmosphere thickens with trapped heat. This is not a summer heat wave. This is the beginning of planetary suffocation. Oceans respond first. The surface waters, under continuous solar bombardment, begin to warm beyond livable thresholds. Evaporation accelerates at an exponential pace. Water vapor fills the air, creating dense, moisture-laden clouds. At first, this seems like a shield, a barrier against the heat. But greenhouse gases trap even more thermal energy. The atmosphere becomes a feedback loop of rising temperatures and increasing humidity. Torrential rains begin to fall, but they are the balance between evaporation and precipitation shatters. As the air grows hotter, the ability to hold moisture expands, delaying rainfall until saturation forces it. Flash floods roar across lowlands, carving through cities and forests alike. But soon, the vapor can no longer condense. The clouds begin to thin. Skies over the daylocked side become dry, yellow-white, and endless. The oceans continue to retreat. Shorelines vanish, coral reefs bleach and disintegrate. Marine life, sensitive to even slight changes in temperature, begins to die off en masse. The upper layers of the ocean stratify, warm above, cooler below, but without wind to stir them or tides to mix them. The sea loses its motion. It becomes a stagnant, steaming body, a shadow of its former vitality. As the sea boils away, the land begins to fracture. The water cycles collapse, leave soil brittle. Lakes dry up. Rivers cease to flow. Once fertile valleys turn to cracked basins. The ground itself bakes. Asphalt liquefies. Buildings warp under thermal stress, and once green spaces burn too. Ash, wildfires, fueled by dead vegetation and dry air, rage uncontrollably. No cool night arrives to suppress them. Vegetation cannot adapt. Photosynthesis is a process of rhythm, light and dark, growth and rest. In constant light, plants become overstimulated. Their cellular processes begin to misfire. Leaves curl, chlorophyll breaks down, stems split under dehydration. Even the most heat-tolerant species begin to fail. Agriculture collapses first, then wild ecosystems. What was once a lush, green world turns brown, then black. Animals follow. Nocturnal species lose their cycle entirely. Diurnal creatures, built to rest at night, suffer fatigue, confusion, and heat stroke. Food chains shatter as herbivores starve and carnivores run out of prey. Insects disappear. Birds abandon their nests. Mammals retreat underground, but even the soil cannot shield them for long. Burrows overheat. Caves offer little protection. The biosphere is collapsing, not with violence, but with exhaustion. Human civilization, rooted in the day-night cycle, begins to fracture under the endless day. Cities built for fluctuating temperatures now overheat continuously. Power grids fail under the demand for cooling. Reservoirs dry. Solar panels, exposed to constant sun, overheat and degrade. Crops fail, water vanishes, and infrastructure begins to crumble. Populations flee toward the twilight zone, but space is limited. Chaos brews where heat meets hope. Communication satellites suffer too. Without the stabilizing effect of Earth's spin, their orbits become unstable. GPS becomes unreliable. Global coordination weakens. Emergency response is slow. Governments falter. Survival becomes localized. The daylight side of the world, once full of progress and ambition, becomes a wasteland of heat, dust, and silence. The skies change hue. No longer blue, the atmosphere thickens and glows a sickly white gold. Dust rises from cracked ground. Without rain, there's nothing to weigh it down. The sky above becomes a dome of suspended haze. Sunlight scatters oddly, making shadows harsh, unnatural. Even vision suffers, glare dominates, and protective eyewear becomes a necessity. Technology strains to compensate. Cooling systems are pushed beyond their limits. Artificial shelters multiply underground bunkers, thick-walled domes, cities powered by geothermal energy. But these are short-term answers to a long-term imbalance. Without natural cycles too, anchor life, civilization becomes a temporary structure on a failing foundation. Meanwhile, the psychological effects take root. Human minds, evolved to recognize day and night, begin to fray under continuous exposure. Circadian rhythms fall apart, insomnia rises, hallucinations follow, depression, anxiety, confusion, all symptoms of a life without rest. Even with artificial lighting and sleep regulation, the mind knows something is wrong. The body feels the lie of the eternal day. Religions and philosophies built around cycles, the sun rising, setting, returning now face existential questions. The metaphors of renewal, of beginning and end, collapse under an unmoving sky. Some find solace in new myths. Others spiral into despair. Rituals fade. Cultural identities fracture. In the absence of rhythm, meaning begins to drift. Yet even here, a few adapt. Scientists in cooled laboratories record data. Writers document the new era. Some species, extremophiles, heat-tolerant microbes, flourish in the cracks of lava rock and salt pans. Insects with hardened exoskeletons, burrowing mammals with dormant metabolism, algae in boiling pools. Life, while wounded, whispers forward. But it is not the life we knew. Above all, the sun remains constant, blazing, watching. No longer the giver of life, it becomes an indifferent overseer. Its light, once divided and distributed by Earth's spin, now bears down without mercy. It is not angry. It is simply present, unmoving, all-powerful. And in that stillness, the Earth's story begins to slow. This is the endless day, the era of heat without pause, of skies without stars, of time that no longer moves forward, but stretches long, unbearable, and bright. And yet, in this broken half of the world, something persists. Not hope, perhaps, but memory, a trace of what once was, a hint of what rotation gave us. And a question that haunts every survivor's mind: how long can this last? While one half of Earth burns under an eternal sun, the other half has been cast into absolute night. No moonlight, no starlight breaking the horizon, just stillness, pure and uninterrupted. This dark hemisphere, now trapped in shadow, begins a journey equally devastating as its counterpart. And unlike fire, which is fast and loud, the cold arrives slowly, quietly, and absolutely. The absence of sunlight sends temperatures into a steady, deadly plunge. Without the warmth of rotation to spread heat across the globe, the sunless side of Earth loses thermal energy, minute by minute. Cities, once bustling with light and life, fall into blackness. Windows frost over. Glass shatters under pressure. Pipes burst. Machinery freezes in place. Nature, once resilient, now begins to die under the weight of silence, and ice.air behaves differently in this new world. With nothing to keep it in motion, atmospheric circulation collapses. Heat no longer moves from light to dark. Winds stall. Clouds vanish. The atmosphere begins to change chemically. Carbon dioxide, which once contributed to warming the planet, now condenses into a snow-like frost and begins to fall. Not water snow, but CO snow, soft and alien. It coats buildings, forests, and bodies in a silent white death. The oceans begin to retreat here, too, but not into steam like the sunlit side. Instead, they freeze from the surface down. Ice thickens layer by layer. Without tides or warming currents, the sea stagnates and hardens. In some areas, it becomes kilometers thick. Where once waves roared and whales breached, there is now only stillness. Entire ocean ecosystems collapse under the crushing ice, and The darkness above. Landscapes change shape. Soil contracts and cracks. Mountains seem sharper under the faint light of auroras, one of the few remaining natural phenomena on this side. But even those begin to fade as the magnetic field weakens with the cessation of planetary spin. Eventually they vanish, leaving only a dark dome of sky filled with nothing. Flora dies first. Without sunlight, photosynthesis ends instantly. Plants in darkness wither in days, then decay. The ground becomes barren. Forests fall. Lichen and mosses, once champions of cold survival, finally freeze and crumble. All green is erased. The land becomes gray, white, and black, a frozen memory of color. Fauna lasts a little longer, but only barely. Cold-blooded species fall into permanent torpor. Birds, unable to migrate, freeze in mid-flight or starve in nests. Mammals cluster for warmth, but food runs out. Predators and prey vanish together. Insects burrow deep, but find no escape. Even microbes, Earth's most persistent life, begin to slow, adapt, or die. In the deep ice, some go dormant, waiting, but most will never wake. Human settlements on the dark side do not survive. Power fails, batteries drain faster in the cold, generators freeze. Without constant heat and light, shelters become tombs. Artificial systems built for short blackouts were never designed for eternal night. Crops can't grow, water freezes in tanks, steel fractures, plastics become brittle. Anything exposed to the open air crystallizes, shatters, or is lost. Only a few underground facilities, buried deep in the crust and powered by nuclear cores, might endure temporarily. Inside them, survivors mark time with clocks, not sunlight. They speak in hushed voices, if they speak at all. The outside is unreachable. Every door leads to death. Even communication becomes difficult. Satellites fail. Radio waves bounce strangely through the dead air. The planet grows quiet. Psychologically, the darkness is its own predator. Without day-night cycles, the human mind begins to deteriorate. Circadian rhythms collapse. Sleep becomes fragmented, dreams vivid and disturbing. Time seems endless, meaningless. Depression and isolation multiply. Some lose speech, others lose memory. The darkness presses not just on the skin, but on the soul. And yet, some try to endure. Scientists study the frozen side, drilling cores from ice that stretches backward in time. They catalog the collapse. Artists sketch by flashlight. Poets write about the silence. But all of it is temporary. Resources dwindle. Fuel runs out. Hope fades. Each attempt at legacy becomes another frozen relic waiting to be found, or never found at all. In this frozen world, even geography alters. Glaciers expand, not slowly, but like tidal waves of ice. Valleys are filled. Hills become indistinguishable. Earth's contours flatten beneath layers of frost. Cities are buried. Roads erased. Monuments lost beneath kilometers of permafrost. If future explorers ever arrive, they'll find a shell, a planet encased in silence and white. Even technology, humanity's last defense, cannot hold. Solar energy is useless here. Wind energy fails without wind. Fossil fuels cannot be extracted or burned fast enough. Nuclear energy lasts longest, but not forever. One by one, outposts go dark. One by one, the lights inside go out. Still, even in the face of annihilation, the dark side of Earth holds something the sunlit side does not: peace. The collapse is slow, predictable, not fiery or violent, but graceful in its own way. The snow falls gently. The frost spreads like lace. Death here is not an explosion, it's a whisper, and deep in the coldest places, in geothermal vents, beneath the ice sheets, perhaps in the crust itself, something microscopic may linger. Bacteria adapted to extremes. Organisms who knew how to wait. Not thriving, but not gone. Suspended in stasis. Waiting for what comes next. Looking from space, Earth now resembles a coin. One half blindingly bright, the other black and shining with frost. A planet divided, no longer spinning, no longer whole. Balance has become extremity, harmony has become isolation, and the side in darkness once filled with cities, forests, and laughter is now a silent monument to what was, but the story is not over. The twilight zone, the narrow edge between fire and ice, still clings to fragile life. The next chapter lies there, where cold and heat collide, and where Earth's final hope may still flicker. In the narrow strip between endless day and endless night, a battle unfolds. This is the Terminator Zone, a jagged boundary where searing sunlight meets perpetual darkness. Here Earth's atmosphere writhes in confusion. Air heated by the unrelenting sun crashes into columns of frozen gas spilling from the night. The result is chaos, a violent corridor of wind and turbulence where the laws of nature bend under pressure. No longer guided by planetary spin, the jet streams that once circled the globe collapse, their smooth paths fragment. Without the Coriolis effect, wind systems lose their stability. In their place, new air currents rise, monstrous, unpredictable, and deadly. Hot gases from the scorched hemisphere surge toward the cold side, while freezing air rushes back to fill the void. These opposing forces slam into each other along the Terminator line with hurricane force, creating a permanent storm front that circles the planet. This atmospheric war zone becomes a graveyard for clouds. Moisture is stripped, shredded, and redistributed unevenly. Rain no longer falls in cycles. Instead, it becomes violent and random, flash floods followed by months of nothing. In some zones, massive thunderstorms form and never move, locked in place by temperature imbalance. In others, towering dust cyclones stretch miles into the sky, dragging sand across continents that have forgotten calm. Wind speed increases to unimaginable levels. Gusts reach hundreds of kilometers per hour, unrelenting and constant. Structures, if any remain, are torn from foundations. Trees, even deeply rooted ones, are snapped like twigs. The few surviving animals and humans, near the Terminator Zone, are pushed either into the furnace of eternal day or the tomb of endless night. No one can live where the wind never sleeps. These superstorms do more than destroy, they reshape. Dunes migrate across abandoned cities. Soil is lifted and carried across oceans. Entire landscapes are buried under airborne earth. The geography we once knew begins to shift, not gradually, but aggressively. Deserts rise in places once green. Mountain faces erode in weeks instead of centuries. The wind carves new scars into the planet. Temperature differences between the hemispheres become more extreme with time. On the day side, surface temperatures reach levels hot enough to melt asphalt and deform metal. On the night side, the cold grows even deeper, turning rock brittle and unyielding. And in the middle, the wind keeps trying to balance what can no longer be balanced. It is a futile, endless effort, nature's final, desperate attempt to restore harmony. As atmospheric pressure systems fail, so does the sky itself. The upper atmosphere, once thick and protective, begins to thin out. Without Earth's magnetic field, already weakened in earlier chapters, solar radiation penetrates deeper. The ozone layer disintegrates. Ultraviolet light scorches the surface. Cosmic rays slip through. The sky, once blue and full of clouds, turns pale, then gray, then fades to a permanent haze. Auroras vanish entirely now. The weakened magnetosphere no longer supports their glow. The skies are dark, or white-hot, or filled with dust, depending on which side of the planet you stand. And above it all, satellites fail one by one. Their orbits decay. Some burn in the atmosphere, others drift lifeless in space. Communication ends. Weather predictions are pointless. The sky is no longer a window. It is a wall. Humanity's final settlements, if they exist, are forced underground or deep into natural shelters. The Terminator Zone is too volatile. Only the deepest caves, sealed bunkers, and geothermal refuges offer temporary protection. Here, sensors and instruments still try to make sense of the new world. Scientists monitor wind speeds, atmospheric loss, and chemical changes. But their data tells one truth: the atmosphere is coming apart as pressure differences become unsustainable. Wind patterns begin to cannibalize themselves. Vortices fold into one another. Pressure systems collapse, releasing energy like detonations. Explosive airbursts flatten everything. The surface becomes pitted and shredded, not just by time or temperature, but by air itself. Air that once sustained life, now transformed into a weapon of erosion and death. Storms become intelligent in their cruelty. They wait, they return, they grow in the exact places life might try to survive. The rhythm of the wind is no longer natural. It is surgical, precise, merciless. Any attempt at rebuilding is undone in hours. Roads vanish. Crops fail before they sprout. Drones sent into the storm belt are ripped apart mid-flight. No technology can tame this new sky. Yet, paradoxically, the wind also preserves, in some areas, fine dust and sand entomb cities like Pompeii. Statues, doorways, and digital screens are locked under layers of silt, frozen in time. One day, perhaps millennia from now, if another species finds this world, they will unearth these monuments beneath dunes, silent, wind-swept echoes of human defiance. The psychological toll of the Terminator Zone cannot be overstated. For those who live near its borders, day never becomes night, and night never becomes day. The sky screams constantly. The air never rests. Sleep is nearly impossible. Lights flicker under strain. Machinery groans against endless pressure. People wear ear protection at all times. Children grow up knowing only the howl of the wind. This imbalance is permanent. Without rotation, Earth has lost its greatest regulator. It can no longer distribute temperature or air evenly. Each hemisphere has become a sealed fate, and the wind between them is the last living thing trying to remember balance. But even it is beginning to fail. In time, the winds begin to lose strength, not because harmony is restored, but because the energy driving them is breaking down. The atmosphere itself begins to erode. Solar wind and radiation push particles into space. Earth's grip on its air weakens. The sky begins to bleed away, first at the edges, then faster, then irreversibly. This chapter is the end of weather, as we know it. No more seasons. No more jet streams. No more clouds that drift gently across blue skies. All that's left is a brutal divide, searing sun, frozen night, and a belt of eternal storm that cannot be crossed. But beyond this chaos, beyond the thunder and screaming wind, something else waits. A thin shell of hope still clings to the twilights, and the story of what remains will soon reach its quietest, most haunting phase. It began slowly, so slowly that no one noticed. The moon, Earth's eternal companion, had always been moving away. For billions of years, it drifted outward at the rate of mere centimeters per year, like a farewell stretched across eternity. But in the world where Earth had stopped spinning, where winds tore through continents and the balance of nature collapsed, that slow departure became something more profound. It became an unraveling. The moon no longer held the same sway, with Earth's rotation frozen. Tidal forces once orchestrated by the gravitational dance between planet and satellite began to falter. The ocean tides, once pulled in and out like the breath of a planet, became static, confused. Without the spinning Earth to meet the moon's tug with equal resistance, the mechanics changed. The tides weakened, then vanished, along the coasts. Life once flourished in the rhythm of water. Mangrove roots soaked and dried with precision. Tide pools filled and emptied on cue, offering shelter to thousands of creatures. Now with no tides, those ecosystems collapsed. Saltwater stood stagnant. Algae bloomed, unchecked. Sea life accustomed to rhythmic change found itself trapped in stale, unmoving water. Starfish withered. Crabs suffocated. Coral, already weakened by rising temperatures, bleached out and died. Without tides, Earth's oceans became still. Not peaceful, but lifeless. Currents lost direction. Oxygen stopped circulating. Deep waters, once stirred by the moon's invisible pull, settled into silence. Fish populations declined rapidly. Whales, guided by sound and motion, grew confused in their migrations. Some simply stopped migrating. Others beached themselves in the confusion. The pulse of the ocean, once dictated by the moon's hand, now ceased, and above it all, the moon continued its drift. It no longer rose and set in predictable cycles. On the sunlit half of the planet, it was rarely visible. On the dark side, it shone bright, full distant, but offered no comfort. Its slow migration away from Earth was now apparent, not just in data, but in the sky. Its size seemed smaller, its pull weaker, its presence less certain. Astronomers tracked the moon's increasing distance with growing concern. The gravitational lock that had once stabilized Earth's axial tilt was weakening. The tilt began to fluctuate, no longer held steady by the moon's mass. Seasons already shattered by the planet's halted rotation now became meaningless. The angle of sunlight shifted unpredictably. Light bent where it should not. Shadows stretched in alien ways. With the moon losing influence, Earth's wobble increased. It wasn't a dramatic topple, but rather a meandering drift of orientation. This added chaos to a world already disordered. On what remained of the temperate belt, temperatures swung unpredictably. Cold spells returned briefly to sunlit lands, while warmth crept into the night side, only to vanish again. It was as if the planet's posture could no longer hold still. Humanity had once revered the moon as a symbol of constancy. It ruled calendars, marked festivals, inspired poetry. Now, it was leaving, quietly, without a sound. Its departure wasn't violent, but it was devastating. Earth was becoming more alone. Gravitational tides weren't limited to water. Land responded to the moon's pull, too. Without that subtle flexing, Earth's crust became more brittle. Tectonic plates, already slowed by the loss of internal heat, began to grind in awkward pauses. Some mountain ranges stalled in their growth. Others cracked apart under uneven stress. Seismic activity rose in new places, surprising what remained of monitoring stations. The moon had also been a guardian. Its mass shielded Earth from many potential asteroid impacts. It took the brunt of collisions, its surface scarred with craters. That could have been Earth's. With it drifting away, Earth's vulnerability increased. Near-Earth objects that once skimmed past with minor perturbations now followed new trajectories. A few small impacts struck nothing catastrophic yet, but each one a reminder of what was now unguarded. In ancient times, people believed the moon affected emotion, madness, even fate. Now, stripped of its power, it became a symbol of abandonment. The psychological toll deepened. In lunar colonies once dreamed of, no lights remained. Space agencies had long ceased operations. No communication beamed between Earth and orbit. Satellites fell. Probes died. The moon's surface, once marked by human footprints, grew cold and untouched again. Poets had once written about the moon's romance with Earth, but now it resembled something else along. Slow farewell that neither side could prevent. Fight, no climax, just distance, silence, and the understanding that their connection was not eternal. For scientists, the moon's retreat offered sobering data. Models predicted that in a far enough future, the moon could become gravitationally repelled, not flung into deep space, but orbiting at such a distance that its influence would be negligible. Earth would spin if it could loan no tides, no nightlight, no lunar compass for ancient instincts. The sky changed without the moon's prominence. Nights on the dark side became ink black. The stars seemed sharper, yes, but emptier. The absence of the moon's glow changed the rhythm of observation, of ritual. Where once wolves howled, now there was silence. Where once lovers gazed upward, there was only emptiness. Marine species that used the moon for reproduction, coral spawning, sea turtles nesting, faced extinction. Their life cycles were tied to light and timing. With no tides and no lunar cue, they failed to reproduce. Species vanished quietly. No one was left to record them. No documentaries, no obituaries. Just disappearance. The loss of the moon was not the cause of Earth's downfall, but it was a milestone, one of the final bonds between planet and cosmos to break. A reminder that nothing, not even the most faithful celestial companion, lasts forever. Earth had always been defined in part by its moon, its size, its orbit, its climatol shaped in the quiet tug of lunar gravity. That chapter was ending. In underground settlements, some communities tried to recreate the moon's rhythm, artificially simulated light cycles to help regulate sleep, hormones, psychological health. But even those artificial moons couldn't fully replicate the ancient comfort of the real one. They were mere echoes, flickers against a synthetic ceiling. Some historians began calling this age the Great Drifting, not just because of the moon, but because everything, air, life, orbit, meaning, was drifting away. The moon was just the most visible part of it, a cosmic metaphor rendered literal. Earth, once part of a delicate gravitational duet, now found itself increasingly solitary. In the final centuries of the moon's influence, its orbital path began to lose coherence. Micrometeoroid impacts, solar radiation, and gravitational interference from other celestial bodies made its motion wobble. Not enough to be catastrophic, but enough to be unpredictable. Some feared it would one day escape completely. Others believed it would circle, forgotten, like a distant ghost. And perhaps that was the most haunting truth. The moon didn't fall. It didn't break. It didn't scream. It simply left, lowly, gracefully, and inevitably. Earth didn't cry out either. It just let go. The tides were gone. The coasts fell silent. The oceans no longer whispered in sync with the sky. The earth, once cradled in lunar rhythm, now rocked alone, and above the still waters, in a sky growing darker each year, the moon receded fainter, smaller, and finally, invisible. In the narrow twilight strip, dividing the eternal day from the frozen night, Earth clung to something that resembled life. The Terminator Zone, once just an astronomical term, had now become the planet's last chance at survival. On one side, searing, unending sunlight that scorched every surface it touched. On the other, a suffocating darkness of sub-zero cold, where carbon dioxide snowed from the sky. In between these extremes, a thin ribbon of temperate balance emerged, not by design, but by necessity. It was here that life fought its final, quiet battle. Humans, animals, and plants that had not perished in the earlier environmental collapse had either fled or adapted to this strip. It wasn't paradise. It was compromise. The ground underfoot alternated between frozen rock and cracked clay, depending on how close one stood to the sunward side. The sky above offered neither full light nor darkness, but a constant dim hue, like perpetual dusk. The earliest survivors took to engineering. Shelters built into cliffsides, deep valleys, and underground bunkers became common. Heat management was the priority. In the past, cooling a home was a matter of comfort. Now, it was survival. Radiators, reflectors, and heat-absorbing domes dotted the land. Some of the oldest megastructures were sunshade arrays, massive towers, with adjustable mirrors, designed to reflect just enough sunlight to keep plants alive, but not so much that the area overheated. Agriculture returned in pockets. Where photosynthesis was still possible, engineered crops were bred to thrive in extreme conditions. Some were modified to function under very low light. Others relied on artificial photons emitted by fusion-powered lamps. Vertical farms inside, caves and abandoned subway tunnels became food sanctuaries. Algae and fungi, more tolerant than traditional crops, took center stage in this new diet. Communities became nomadic, moving gradually as the Terminator line shifted with atmospheric changes and orbital decay. What remained of human society was concentrated in mobile hubs, massive walking cities, or tunnel caravans that crawled across the Earth's surface like mechanized insects, always chasing the narrow band of livable temperature. These settlements were not built for comfort. They were survival engines, half technology, half prayer. Animals, too, adapted or died. Cold-blooded reptiles vanished early. Amphibians evaporated with the water. But some mammals, particularly burrowers and scavengers, adjusted. A few evolved rapidly to match the shifting environment. Genetic drift accelerated in isolated populations. New species emerged, smaller, more hit-resistant, more light-sensitive. But their numbers were tiny, fragile echoes of what once was. The frozen half of Earth became a vault. Those with the resources tunneled beneath the permafrost and built cryogenic repositories, data centers, seed banks, DNA libraries. These were desperate acts of memory preservation, not salvation. They knew no one might ever come to retrieve them, but leaving no record at all felt like betrayal. Machines powered by nuclear cores guarded these vaults, programmed to endure for millennia. On the scorched side, few dared to venture. Some drone expeditions tried harvesting solar energy, building massive collectors to beam power back to the Terminator colonies. But the equipment degraded fast under constant radiation. Panels melted, wires snapped, entire systems fried within months. Eventually, even machines refused to go there. It was simply too hot. But even with all the planning, adaptation, and innovation, the situation was always temporary. Resources ran thin, batteries failed, filters clogged, radiation crept through, and above all, the sky was never trustworthy. Solar flares, once rare, now surged frequently. Each one disrupted communications, damaged electronics, and knocked out the few remaining satellites that circled. Earth's sluggish spin. The cultural life of humanity also transformed. There were no more nations, no borders. Identity became geographical, defined by proximity to survival. Language fractured, traditions warped, timekeeping collapsed, replaced by internal clocks, sleep cycles, and artificial light. No sunrises, no sunsets, just engineered routines of wake and rest. Children born in this new world never knew seasons. They were taught about spring and autumn, like myths, concepts from an older Earth. Forests became fairy tales. Rain was a story told to calm nerves at night. Oceans were spoken of like lost gods. The Terminator line was their whole universe, and beyond it stretched death in both directions. Some believed Earth was purging itself. Others saw it as a test. A few had faith in terraforming technologies, hoping one day to push the hostile boundaries outward, reclaiming more of the planet. But most understood the truth. Earth was no longer a home. It was a temporary shelter, one that would not last. Efforts were made to send messages into space again, just in case. Large radio bursts, crafted to repeat the story of humanity, were broadcast from underground dishes, recordings in multiple languages, star charts, images of what Earth once was. Not for rescue, but for memory. For someone, somewhere, to know we had tried. Meanwhile, microbial life continued in surprising places. In the crust's deep rock layers, bacteria found niches of geothermal warmth and chemical energy. In the ruins of old cities, mosses crept through cracks in synthetic structures, feeding off condensation and decaying material. Life, in its smallest forms, refused to vanish. It clung to metal, to stone, to the breath of carbon. Back in the twilight zone, some plants took root in ice. Caverns carved under glaciers, near the dark side. Solar mirrors above ground redirected scattered light into these caverns, creating microclimates. It was a strange sight, ferns glowing under redirected rays, roots tangled in frozen soil. Some of these greenhouses lasted decades before structural fatigue ended them. But while they lived, they brought something precious. Color became rare. Everything in the Terminator zone was gray, rust, or white. Green stood out like a miracle. In fact, people came from miles away to see the greenhouses. Pilgrimages formed silent, respectful journeys to look upon a living plant. Some knelt, some wept. Others simply stood, blinking, trying to remember a world that once thrived in green. As time passed, fewer children were born. Reproduction became medically risky. Populations aged. Some chose euthanasia to conserve resources for the younger. Others wandered into the dead zones, seeking peace and silence. Death was not feared as it once had been. It was understood, expected, shared in this fragile belt of life. Religion found new forms, not based on gods of abundance, but gods of survival. Shrines were built to old machines that still worked. Songs were written to honor those who repaired oxygen filters. A cult formed around a solar mirror that survived 3 flares without cracking. Faith, like life, evolved. Eventually, even the Terminator line began to shift unpredictably. Solar expansion distorted Earth's orbit slightly. The line thinned, then thinned again. Storms on the edge grew fiercer. Underground cities reinforced their walls. Some collapsed under quakes or fires. Others went silent, no radio, no signal, nothing. In the final days of this chapter of Earth, only a few settlements remained. Their light shone faintly in the distance, filtered through ash-filled air. Outside their domes, winds howled. Inside, people read old books, shared stories, and prepared. They knew they would not win, but they could endure, even for a little longer. Because that is what life does, it tries. With Earth's rotation halted, the changes on the surface were already devastating, but deep beneath the crust, something even more critical was unraveling. The planet's molten core, once stabilized and energized by the spinning motion of Earth, began to shift into chaos. Rotation had acted like a gyroscope, keeping the planet's internal layers moving in harmony. Without it, the convection currents that powered the magnetic field began to slow. The dynamo effect, the very process that shielded Earth from solar wrath, was faltering. The magnetic field had always been an invisible guardian. It extended far beyond the atmosphere, deflecting solar wind, protecting satellites, preserving ozone, and keeping radiation at bay. It shaped auroras and buffered Earth's life against the constant pulse of solar storms. But as the core motion dwindled, the field began to unravel like thread pulled from a fraying cloth. At first, it weakened unevenly, creating patches of exposure. Then, over time, the entire field thinned. The first noticeable change was in the skies. Auroras, once brilliant curtains of green and red dancing over the poles, faded into silence. These luminous displays were more than beauty, they were symptoms of a functional shield. Their absence was a quiet warning. Earth was becoming vulnerable. The poles, which had long absorbed the brunt of incoming solar particles, now felt every gust of cosmic wind directly. Then, the equator began to feel it too. There was nowhere left to hide. Radiation levels climbed steadily. What had once been filtered through magnetic lines now struck the atmosphere without resistance. Satellites, already operating in degraded orbits due to the collapsed balance of day and night, began to fail in waves. Communication blackouts became normal. GPS drifted out of sync. Space stations, once symbols of human progress, became unsafe, abandoned, or lost. The night sky, once a source of wonder, became a danger zone. On Earth's surface, the consequences were subtler but deadly. The upper atmosphere began to erode. Without magnetic protection, Solar particles stripped away molecules bit by bit. Oxygen and nitrogen levels dipped in high altitudes. Jet stream patterns collapsed further. Planes were grounded permanently, not by fuel shortages, but because the skies themselves had become lethal. High radiation zones emerged in belts across the globe. These were not uniform, but chaotic, following where the magnetic remnants once offered protection. Cities within these belts suffered mysterious ailments. Cancers spiked. Electronic systems burned out. Crops failed under skies that looked unchanged but had turned deadly. Entire populations relocated underground, not from heat or cold, but to escape the invisible storm pouring in from space. Animals with internal compasses, migratory birds, sea turtles, bees lost their sense of direction. Some flew in circles, others vanished. Ecosystems fragmented, no longer guided by geomagnetic maps passed down through evolution. Many species simply stopped returning. Navigation had become guesswork. Survival became luck. The weakening core also had geological consequences. Without a spinning Earth to generate centrifugal balance, tectonic pressure redistributed strangely. Fault lines acted in unpredictable ways. Earthquakes struck in regions that had been dormant for centuries. Volcanic systems responded inconsistently. Some erupted with new fury. Others ceased entirely, as magma movement inside the mantle grew, confused and sluggish. Beneath the surface, the core itself began to cool. Not rapidly, but enough to matter. The iron-nickel swirl that had powered Earth's heartbeat began to solidify. The outer core thickened, choking the once fluid movement of the molten layers. Some scientists in surviving labs theorized that Earth was beginning to die from the inside out, not just biologically, but geologically. In many of the remaining human colonies, this inner death became a spiritual symbol. Temples were built in caves to honor the heart below, a poetic name for the failing core. Stories spread that, as long as the Earth's center remained warm, hope endured. Pilgrimages were made to geothermal vents, where heat still bled from the deep. People bathed in the steam and whispered prayers. It was a quiet act of mourning, not just for themselves, but for a planet growing still. In some places, ancient magnetic stones, lodestones once used in navigation, were found to have lost their magnetism entirely. It was as if even Earth's memory of its magnetic past was vanishing. Compasses no longer worked. Maps were reduced to guesswork. Survivors relied on the stars, which, at least for now, still offered reliable direction, though those too would one day shift as the solar system changed. Technological attempts to rebuild an artificial magnetic field were proposed in the early years of collapse. Massive superconducting loops, satellite shields, fusion-powered magnetic nets. But without global infrastructure, these dreams never reached beyond isolated prototypes. One or two projects shielded small domes or underground bunkers, but the global field what Earth had once generated so naturally was gone for good. Children born in this age never learned to fear solar flares. They learned to respect them like weather. Schools taught how to recognize radiation exposure before symptoms grew fatal. Entire curricula were rewritten. Lessons on ecosystems and history were replaced with modules on shelter engineering, oxygen conservation, and cosmic radiation effects. There was no going back. The future was adaptation or extinction. Some underground cities established artificial magnetospheres using rotating plasma loops. These domes became prized refuges, bright, shielded, humming with machinery that mimicked Earth's lost protection. But they were rare, fragile, and short-lived. Maintenance required resources that grew scarcer every year, and when one failed, the death toll was immediate. There were no second chances in a sky without shielding. The planet itself became a test of endurance. Every living system that had evolved under Earth's once kind conditions was now exposed to the raw cosmos. Cosmic rays, once scattered by magnetic fields, now carved straight lines of damage through skin, DNA, and bone. Medical teams focused less on cure and more on prevention: metal shelters, radiation gel, gene editing for resistance. Even the oceans, shallow and acidic as they had become, responded to the magnetic collapse. Currents slowed, then stopped. Without magnetic influence, the Coriolis effect ceased, and circulation patterns failed. Deep-sea oxygen levels dropped. The last of the marine megaphonic creatures that had somehow survived the heat and cold disappeared into silence. The seas became still graves, with no magnetic field to stop them. Solar particles also bombarded Earth's remaining satellites with increased force. Data centers fried. Artificial intelligence networks that had been helping manage the last sustainable cities went dark one by one. A second kind of extinction began: digital. The minds that had preserved memory, culture, even music, were erased in cascades of failure. And yet, in all this, some flicker of purpose remained. A final generation of scientists continued monitoring the failing core, cataloging the last pulse of Earth's natural protection. Seismic stations still recorded slow tremors. Magnetometers traced the fading curves of what had once been beautiful, complex loops of planetary defense. Even as the readings approached zero, they kept recording. In one facility deep below, what used to be Canada's single magnetometer was programmed to emit a tone as long as Earth's field remained above a specific threshold. The tone had become weaker over the decades, dropping in pitch, but it still played a haunting low hum that echoed through the halls of the underground lab. Residents called it the Earth's final song, and then, one day, the tone stopped. No alarms, no explosions, just silence. In that moment, Earth was no longer a planet with a shield. It had become a bare stone drifting through a solar storm. Everything that followed, every loss, every breath, every adaptation, would happen without that most ancient protection. And everyone who heard the silence knew this was not just the end of a system, it was the end of Earth's beating heart. Once Earth stopped spinning, time began to fracture, not just physically, but mentally. The familiar rhythm of day and night had ended. No sunrise, no sunset, no ticking of nature's clock. The side facing the sun remained in constant light, an eternal, blistering noon. The other remained in perpetual night, cold, unmoving, starless. The most basic human reference time itself began to break down. People had long relied on the cycle of light and darkness to measure their days. From ancient sundials to digital watches, time had always been something Earth offered freely. But now, without rotation, there were no time zones, no mornings, no evenings. The very concept of tomorrow began to fade. One side of the world boiled, the other froze. In between the Terminator line, survivors clung to shadow, but even there, the illusion of hours passing was gone. Psychologically, the effects were immediate. Human minds had evolved to follow the sun. Circadian rhythms, sleep cycles, hormone release, all built around light and dark. In the absence of natural cues, brains began to drift. Some people slept for 18 hours, others couldn't sleep at all. Hallucinations increased. Time became a personal experience, different for every individual, and increasingly unreliable. Communities that had survived in the twilight zones struggled to maintain artificial schedules. Some built underground shelters with controlled lighting, trying to simulate days and nights. Lamps dimmed and brightened in 12-hour cycles. Alarms chimed to indicate shifts. But the body didn't always listen. Without Earth's true rhythm, internal clocks slipped. People forgot whether it was morning or night. Conversations started with, "What hour do you feel it is?" The sense of time loss became more than just a physical confusion. It turned into an existential crisis. Elders could no longer tell how old they were. Children didn't know how to count birthdays. Calendars became meaningless. The date was still recorded on digital logs, but few believed it anymore. In a world without days, the passage of time had become theory, not truth. In scientific stations, some groups attempted to keep coordinated universal time alive. Clocks ran, servers ticked, records were filed, but the emotional disconnect was growing. A time stamp meant nothing when you hadn't seen a sunrise in years. Days stretched endlessly in the light. Nights became bottomless in the dark. Productivity collapsed. Depression rates spiked. Suicides quietly increased, especially among those isolated in far-flung observation domes. Religion and culture were also shaken. Rituals built around the solar cycle's sunrise prayers, lunar fasts, seasonal festivals lost their foundation. Pilgrimages that once followed the equinox or solstice were abandoned. In the dark side, some began to worship cold and silence. In the light, fire and heat were seen as divine. A new schism emerged, not of belief, but of light versus dark. Civilization itself began to split along the divide. Language evolved to phrases like, "see you tomorrow," or "later tonight," vanished. Time-specific greetings became irrelevant. Clocks were still used, but more as relics than tools. People spoke in shifts and cycles, after third light dimming, or before the next coolant rest. History was still told, but not in years. People began marking eras by major collapses, before the core slowed, or after the final aurora. For those born into this still world, time was never alive. They learned history through stories, but they didn't miss what they'd never had. For them, Earth had always been quiet, always broken. They lived by to eat, when to work, when to sleep, dictated by artificial signals, not sunlight. Some scientists theorized that this generation might evolve entirely new internal clocks adapted to chaos instead of rhythm. Digital systems attempted to provide structure. AI timekeepers pulsed light into homes, rang tones, offered reminders, but power was unreliable. Grid collapses were common. Without global coordination, time fractured into local systems. One settlement's morning was another's third rest. Misinformation spread more easily. Synchronization failed. Even communication was delayed. Satellites dead or dying. Relay systems overloaded. Commerce was gone. Trade had died. With the oceans and agriculture, there were no time-based markets, no stock exchanges, no shipping schedules. Currency became obsolete. Barter returned. A tool, a battery, a jug of filtered water, these were the new coins. And in this barter economy, time as money became a joke. Time now was just another word with no anchor. Some tried to return to star-based navigation. Astrologers and astronomers alike looked to constellations, hoping to restore structure. Star positions did shift slowly in the sky, and over decades, became a new kind of clock. The Southern Cross, Polaris, these began to serve as orientation points, but even that was limited. The red glow of the bloated sun on the light side washed out the stars. The dark side, too cold to explore deeply, gave limited access. Mental health care became one of the most critical sciences of the era. Psychologists, neuroscientists, and behavioral engineers worked to design environments that could trick the brain into calm. Light therapy, neural pacing, artificial horizon simulators all were deployed to ease the psychological burden of timelessness. Some success was found, but the deeper issue remained. Humanity was designed for a spinning Earth, and the Earth no longer spun. Some believed the planet's soul had stopped, along with its rotation, that this was not just physical, but spiritual death. The Earth had always been in motion. Tectonic shifts, ocean currents, spinning skies, it had danced through space for billions of years. Now it had gone still. Dead planets don't move, they said. Dead planets don't mark time. The impact on technology was strange. Computer systems reliant on global synchronization, atomic clocks, satellite coordination, encrypted communications. Time drift introduced errors. Systems built for a spinning world didn't function in a frozen one. Even those running on solar power had challenges: too much exposure on the light side, not enough on the dark. Power grids had to be redesigned from scratch. Music, stories, and human creativity also began to reflect the timeless state. Songs no longer followed rhythm. They were ambient, droning. Non-linear stories were not told in order, but in feelings, in flashes. The idea of beginning, middle, end weakened. People lived in the moment because moments were all they had. Memory replaced chronology. Feeling replaced the clock. In some underground archives, a group of historians and physicists worked on what they called the memory clock. It was not a device that told time, but a record of what time used to mean. They gathered videos of sunsets, recordings of ticking watches, literature structured around time's flow. It was not meant to fix the present. It was a gift for the future or for whatever might come after humans. A reminder that Earth once moved, that life once had rhythm. And still, for all that was lost, some things endured. A few plants in hydroponic labs continued to open and close their leaves, guided by internal timers that remembered Earth's past rhythm. Human hearts still beat, not in sync with the sun anymore, but still pulsing, still alive. The sky no longer changed, but inside their bodies, time moved forward. In the end, time did not stop. Only its markers disappeared. Time became internal, subjective, fragmented, but it continued. In thought, in feeling, in heartbeat, in memory. Even without Earth's spin, people found a way to exist. Not thrive, not grow, but exist. And in the stillness, some even claimed to hear echoes of the old world, a whisper of time, carried on the solar wind. With the Earth's rotation stopped, the planet itself began to respond, not just in light and temperature, but in shape. For billions of years, Earth had been slightly flattened at the poles and bulging at the equator, a natural result of spinning. This oblate spheroid had been our silent companion, influencing ocean levels, wind patterns, and even GPS calculations. But now, with no centrifugal force to balance it, that shape started to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, the bulge at the equator began to settle. The crust, no longer under the outward pressure of spin, began to sag downward. Over thousands of years, the equator shrank, the poles rose, and the planet started moving toward a more perfect sphere. Tectonic plates, which had long danced on the flowing mantle, now experienced forces they hadn't known before. Without the rotation, convection patterns inside the mantle changed, altering the movement of plates. Mountain ranges shifted. Some collapsed under their own weight, as the balance between stress and support was altered. Others rose in new places, where crusts compressed unexpectedly. Earthquakes became less frequent, but far more unpredictable. Without the stabilizing effect of rotation, the crust became sluggish, but unstable, reacting slowly to pressures that once would have been dispersed by planetary spin. The oceans, too, began to behave strangely. Without centrifugal force to hold them in place around the equator, water started to flow gradually but powerfully toward the poles. Once tropical regions found themselves drying out, their seas draining away like water in a tilted bowl. The Arctic and Antarctic basins filled. Massive inland seas formed where none had existed before. In contrast, long-standing coastlines were abandoned. Cities once by the shore became desert outposts. New strangeness appeared in geography. Places that had always been arid became flooded. Valleys filled with seawater, and mountain basins turned into freshwater lakes from redirected rainfall and melt. The Sahara, emptied of moisture for millennia, saw rivulets trickle into its lowest basins. The Amazon, once a lush jungle, now long dead, became a salt basin, cracked and glittering under strange tides. Asia's high plateaus turned marshy as water, redirected through fault zones. The redistribution of mass altered Earth's gravity slightly. Areas that had once experienced a subtle upward push near the equator now felt heavier. At the poles, the ground relaxed upward, land rebounding slowly after eons of compression. Satellite orbits had to be recalibrated. Systems that relied on precise geolocation became faulty or unusable. The Earth's surface wasn't where it used to be. In truth, it wasn't the same planet anymore. This rebalancing affected atmospheric pressure as well. With water and land moving, wind patterns followed. But now, without the Coriolis effect generated by spin, air currents were driven only by heat gradients and terrain. Pressure zones locked into place for decades. Weather systems, though fewer, became more extreme. Monsoons hit the same spot every year. Floods lasted for generations in low-lying polar plains. Ancient tectonic hotspots reacted oddly. With crustal stress redistributed, magma began pushing up in unpredictable ways. Dormant volcanoes reawakened, not in the explosive manner of past geological eras, but in slow oozing, reshaping lava flows. Basalt fields expanded across continents. Some human shelters, once built in tectonically stable zones, were lost as the terrain betrayed its new identity. One unexpected result of this shift was the creation of new habitable zones. In regions between the former equator and the mid-latitudes, conditions became surprisingly tolerable. With water refilling basins and temperatures stabilizing due to new sea currents, some life tried to return. Algae bloomed in artificial lakes. Bacteria and fungus colonized warm, wet stone. These were not lush environments, but they were alive microbial echoes of Earth's resilience. Humans, where few still survived, began to chart this new geography. Old maps were useless. Satellites struggled to maintain orbits as mass redistribution subtly tweaked gravity. Digital elevation models failed. New exploration had to be done the hard way by drone, by rover, by foot. The stories brought back were surreal. Deserts underwater, forests fossilized in salt, ancient cities surrounded by inland seas. The crust also responded unevenly. In some places, the lack of rotational bulge caused massive collapse. Sinkholes hundreds of meters wide opened without warning. Subterranean systems once pressurized by spin-dependent geology now caved. Conversely, fault zones locked up for centuries began to move again less frequently, but with far more damage. The ground groaned more than it quaked, shifting like something trying to stretch itself into a new form. Scientists began modeling what the planet might look like in another 1,000 years. If the trends continued, the Earth would become nearly spherical, with polar superoceans and equatorial highlands. The magnetic field, already failing, would disappear completely. Tectonics might eventually stop altogether, freezing the continents in a final layout. It would be a planet at rest, physically symmetrical, but biologically stillborn. The redistribution of oceans also changed salinity levels, with massive evaporation. On the light side, salt concentrations rose in shrinking basins. Former freshwater systems were contaminated by encroaching brine. Some lakes began crystallizing from the edges inward, forming salt plateaus that looked like mirrors under the red-tinted sky. This had implications for any microbial life still trying to survive, narrowing the possibilities even further. All this reshaping didn't go unnoticed in the human psyche. Survivors began to name these new features, not after gods or kings, but after memories. Lake Remember, the Cradle Basin, Ridge of the Last Storm. These weren't grand cities or capitals. They were scars, markers of what had changed. Naming them was a way to hold on, to map something even when time and space had both come loose. The moon, still drifting farther away, had reduced its influence on tides to nearly zero. The dynamic relationship between Earth and Moon, once a cosmic dance, was reduced to silent glances across a broken floor. With the Earth's reshaping, the Moon's apparent size in the sky shifted too. sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, always haunting, like a former partner watching from a distance, unable to help. Biodiversity remained low, but researchers did note that in geothermal zones, where heat seeped from cracks in the Earth's new skin, extremophiles had begun colonizing. They thrived on sulfur, on salt, on volcanic heat. They needed no light, no seasons, just chemistry. It was a grim version of life, but it was life nonetheless. And it marked a line in the sand. Earth reshaped, was not entirely dead. Culturally, the Earth's changing form triggered myth-making again. Isolated populations believed the Earth was healing, becoming its true form. That rotation had been a curse, that this still, symmetrical Earth was the real one. These beliefs shaped new rituals. People built stone spirals in newly dried lakes, mimicking the planet's former spin. Others carved reliefs into rock, showing the bulge and its disappearance. The science of geoshaping, once theoretical, became necessary. Humanity began to use machines to stabilize certain regions, to slow down collapses, to dam new seas. Artificial tectonics became a field, not to move continents, but to slow them, to give the crust some order. A last act of control on a planet trying to become something else. In the end, Earth's new shape was more than a geological consequence. It was symbolic. The planet had been spinning for 4-5 billion years. That motion had defined every mountain, every cloud, every drop of ocean. Now, it was gone, and the world was transforming not violently, but steadily into a shape it had never worn before. Not the Earth we inherited, but the one we left behind. Long after Earth had settled into its new, distorted stillness, it remained a world haunted by echoes. The once vibrant blue planet had been split into two extremes, one side seared by eternal daylight, the other locked in unending night. But, despite the lifelessness, the silence, and the absence of time's rhythm, memory clung to the surface like frost on forgotten stone. Earth had not forgotten itself. The sunlit side, scorched for centuries without rest, had transformed into a crust of glass and ash. Cities were buried beneath dunes of irradiated dust, their outlines barely visible from above. Skyscrapers, once pulsing with human energy, now lay collapsed, their steel skeletons twisted by relentless solar heat. Roads melted and reformed as black ribbons, snaking between the bones of what were once bustling metropolises. The ground itself was fossilized, not by compression or pressure, but by exposure. Even shadows left impressions, burned into the concrete. The extreme temperature had done more than erase, it had preserved. A single cup on a cafe table, caught mid-use centuries ago, remained in place like a relic sealed in amber. The heat had sterilized everything, mummifying moments. Solar panels stood upright, still glinting under unending sunlight, their circuits long since dead, but perfectly intact. Billboards faded, but slogans could still be read. There was no decay here, only permanence through desolation. On the opposite side, in the eternal dark, the story was different. Here, the air had condensed, frozen, and fallen as silent snow long ago. Buildings cracked under the weight of frozen atmosphere, their windows shattered not by impact, but by contraction. Snow covered everything like a shroud, not just ice, but layers of carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen, and water vapor, crystallized into geology. Beneath this blanket lay towns preserved as though in sleep. A playground, frozen mid-swing. A library with books intact but unreadable, their ink bled out by time and cold. The dark side was not scorched clean, it was smothered in memory. Unlike the glass deserts of the day side, the night side held silence in layers, preserving soundless echoes in dust and ice. Between these two realms, the Terminator line, the Twilight Zone, remained the only place where motion once lingered. Here, ancient outposts built during the Earth's transition still stood. Their foundations were reinforced, their walls layered with heat shields and thermal traps. Some were observatories, others, shelters. Some merely recorded data. In many, data was still being transmitted long after the humans had gone. Machines without orders continuing their last programmed loop, recording, watching, waiting. These ruins served as museums of memory. Scientists, if any remained, would have described them as geological time capsules. But the Earth didn't just preserve structures, it preserved meaning. One could still find etchings inside stone bunkers, where children's hands had scratched names or symbols into steel walls. Notes scrawled on whiteboards inside science stations. A chessboard frozen mid-game. The unfinished details of lives that once moved through time, now trapped in a timeless prison in the fossilized cities of the hot side. Some windows reflected the red of the now distant sun. From orbit, satellites still caught glints, as though the cities were blinking upward, signaling on the frozen side. High-altitude drones that had crash-landed decades ago now lay buried under crystal. The Earth had turned into a graveyard, not of bones, but of moments. Everything looked paused, as if history had held its breath and never exhaled. One of the most haunting discoveries, according to later spacefaring historians, was the preserved face of a human being half turned to the sky, encased in a pressure suit, helmet still intact. Found in the Terminator zone, lying in the rubble of a collapsed monitoring station, this silent witness became the symbol of Earth's last generation. Their name erased by time, their expression unreadable, but they were there, a testament that someone stayed, someone watched it end. The magnetic field was long gone by now, and with it, the auroras that once danced near the poles. Without those lights, the night sky had lost some of its magic, but stars were still visible. In fact, without an atmosphere, they shone brighter, clearer. The irony was bitter. The sky was more beautiful now, but no one left to admire it. Earth was surrounded by majesty, and utterly alone. Humanity's attempts to preserve its legacy archives, buried in vaults. Messages stored on satellites, DNA locked in crystals still existed, but whether they were ever found, whether they were ever understood, was unknown. Earth's story had been written in stone, in metal, in fire and frost. But stories need readers, and Earth had no audience anymore. Robotic systems in orbit still circled. A few probes released millennia ago drifted past the horizon, their signals weak but persistent. Some were meant to document the end of days, others simply lingered to orbital decay. One, the Aurora lens, captured a complete rotation of the Terminator line each decade. Its archive became a ghostly movie. The shrinking snowfields, the blackening deserts, the final sunsets over broken mountains. Beneath the surface, deep vaults still held life's DNA seeds, cells, spores. These were kept in cryogenic silence, designed to wait until Earth changed again. But no new spring was coming. The planet was still, its heat locked on one side, its cold anchored on the other. There would be no thaw, just memory, kept in vaults under tons of ice and stone. Strangely, it was not all hopeless. For those viewing Earth from afar, perhaps from distant observatories orbiting other worlds, it still shimmered, its movement gone, its voice silenced, but its presence undeniable. Earth had become a relic in the museum of the galaxy, a planet that had spun, had sung, had lived, and now, preserved in death, it whispered through reflected light and orbital debris. Some speculated that, over Ian's life, might try again. That heat deep in the crust could spark a new microbial genesis, or that drifting spores, delivered by comets, could seed something strange and new. But it would not be Earth as it was. It would be Earth as remembered by stone and silence. Ultimately, what defined this chapter of Earth's life was not its stillness, but what remained within that stillness. Memory, the fossil of a song, the outline of stories in dust. The Earth had stopped turning, but it hadn't disappeared. It had simply become part of the dark, a still note in the vast, unending symphony of stars. And for those who would one day discover it, for explorers or machines far in the future, the message would be simple. We were here, we lived, we listened, we remembered. The earth no longer turns. It simply exists, silent, unmoving, unchanged, not ruined, not shattered, just ... paused. Like a sentence left unfinished, a breath held too long, a world that decided one day to stop. And in that stillness, a new identity formed, not one of destruction, but of waiting. On the sunlit side, the skies are endless. The sun never sets. It hangs in place, a white disk burning overhead, never shifting, never sleeping. Shadows don't move. Trees, or what's left of them, do not sway. The air doesn't cool. Time doesn't pass in any traditional sense. There is no dawn, no dusk, only light. Blistering, steady, inescapable light. Beneath that light, Earth's surface is baked to uniformity. Mountains no longer cast, sweeping shadows across valleys. Rivers have evaporated into ghost beds of salt and cracked clay. The sky is clear, painfully so, because no weather moves to stir clouds into form. Nothing circulates, nothing refreshes. Even the concept of weather feels ancient. In this part of the world, the very atmosphere has thinned to almost nothing, leaving behind a surface scorched, dry, and sterile. On the opposite side, the story is written in frost and silence. Without sunlight, the dark hemisphere froze solid. What remains is a frozen desert, darker than any night, colder than any polar cap in Earth's former age. It isn't just cold, it's inert. Carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water, all frozen into layered crusts across the terrain. Cities entombed in black ice. Seas turned into layered glass. Skies that were once full of moonlight now see nothing. Even stars struggle to pierce the cold atmosphere. Between these halves lies the terminator, the narrow band where light fades into shadow, where day meets night. It is the last liminal space. For a brief time in Earth's stillness, it served as a refuge, a place where neither extreme ruled entirely. Here, humans once tried to survive, building shelters in the twilight. They carved out warmth, stored energy, mirrored the sun just enough to grow food. They created homes in the balance between fire and frost. But even balance decays. Even twilight fades. One side advanced, the other receded, and the thin line of compromise slowly disappeared. There are no more footfalls here, no new tracks in dust or snow. Earth has become a museum without visitors, a question without an answer. It waits, not for rescue, not for redemption. It simply waits, because there is nothing else left to do. Motion was once the essence of its identity. Spin gave it day and night. Tilt gave it seasons. Rotation shaped everything, from weather to sleep, from tides to thought. Without that motion, Earth has forgotten what it once was. Not entirely, though. Some parts remember. Machines in buried bunkers, powered by thermoelectric trickles, still record and blink. Their sensors pick up nothing new, but they keep time. Anyway, as if counting to something, or through something. Satellite fragments still orbit overhead, some transmitting, some simply falling. On the dark side, frozen signals repeat endlessly. On the hot side, burnt-out antennas still face the sky, receiving only silence. From space, Earth appears deceptively peaceful. To the eye, it glows, half golden, half deep blue. But there are no shifting clouds, no hurricanes spin across its equator, no ice caps breathe with the seasons. From a distance, it resembles a painted sphere, motionless in the black. The illusion of life, the echo of movement. It wasn't always this way. Long ago, when Earth spun with grace, the line between day and night danced across its surface. That movement shaped winds, oceans, migrations, civilizations. Everything once lived by that line, but now there is no dance, only division, only contrast, heat without rest, cold without end. The moon has long since moved away, breaking free from Earth's grasp. Without the gravitational pull between the two, tides died. The rhythmic push and pull of oceans, once a heartbeat, fell silent. Now, only deep craters remain where tidal waters once surged. The Earth is not only still, it is alone. Strangely, some might find beauty in this stillness. There's symmetry in the planet's division, a kind of terrible grace in its silence. No war, no noise, no interruption, just light and dark, forever locked in opposition, carved into the surface of a world that forgot how to turn. And yet, beneath the layers, deep in the crust, or deeper still in memory, something stirs. Not life, not motion, but meaning. Fossilized stories remain. The architecture of thought is etched into stone and metal, into decay and drift. Earth carries memory like a scar, not healing, not changing, but remaining. The silence is not empty, it's full, full of what once was, full of echoes too deep to vanish. Earth has no clock anymore, but it still tells time through layers of sediment, through the decay of isotopes, through the slow collapse of its crust under uneven pressure. Its own body has become a record, somewhere, perhaps, far from this solar system. Another species might one day observe this planet. They might see the strange glow, the fixed hemispheres. They might wonder, was it once like us? Did it know joy? Did it dream? What happens to a world that forgets to move? They'll find no answers in broadcasts or signals, only in the shape of ruins, the angle of collapsed buildings, the chemical residue in soil. Earth is no longer a communicator, it is a canvas. What remains is not activity, but impression. Fossils, architecture, data, all slowly turning into artifacts of stillness in its final form. Earth resembles a split coin, one face shimmering with heat, the other dim and featureless. It is neither dead nor alive. It is paused, as though waiting for the story to continue, but no sequel comes. No wind stirs the pages. This is the end of movement, and yet not the end of story. Because Earth, by stopping, became a message. It is proof that even giants can fall asleep, that motion can halt, that balance, once lost, may never return, but also that meaning can survive without sound, and presence without activity. The sun still burns in the sky above, not with the same force, perhaps, but with light enough to illuminate Earth's silence, and the stars beyond. They shimmer without noticing. They have seen countless planets forget their motion. Earth is not the first. It will not be the last, but to us, to those who once lived on it, or dreamed from it, Earth was unique. A cradle that spun, that changed, that danced between fire and frost, life and death. A world that once sang its own song, in rotation, in rhythm, in radiant beauty. Now it hums no more, but the memory of its melody remains. Night never ends, day never rests, and Earth simply waits.